All right. Hey, everyone. So here's my assignment or my report on culturally responsive teaching, which I think is one of the most effective tools that we can use for teaching. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Whoops. Okay. So as the demographics of the country begin to change in really amazing ways, teachers are faced with teaching students from more and more different backgrounds and cultures. So, with that rise in diversity comes a rise in a need for a teacher to expand their toolbox, right? Their teacher toolbox, in order to help a more diverse population. So, one of those tools that we can place in our teaching toolbox is that of culturally responsive teaching. Okay. But what is culturally responsive teaching, or CRT? Well, it's an emotional academic approach to teaching, and it teaches students academic and cultural responsibility. But more importantly, it shows a student how those two things are tied, right? So, what a student does in the classroom can then impact, and what they're learning can then impact not only their view on society, but their place in society. And it overall teaches them to be agents of change for society. Um, so let's get into how we start doing that. So, again, what is culturally responsive teaching? And this is an article from New America featuring some of the work of Gloria Ladd Billings, who's a leader in CRT. And several frameworks exist for culturally responsive approaches, each outlining various components. And CRT has different names: culturally responsive education, culturally relevant teaching, and culturally congruent teaching. Capturing the history and broad base of scholarship on CRT is not possible here, as there are decades of research and analysis. However, outlining the seminal work of key scholars and teacher educators, Gloria Billings, Geneva Gay, and Django Paris, is a necessary starting point. Over 2 decades ago, Ms. Billings introduced the term culturally relevant pedagogy to describe a form of teaching that calls for engaging learners whose experiences and cultures are traditionally excluded from mainstream settings. Based on her research of effective teachers of African American students, Ladson Billings proposed three goals on which these teachers' practices were grounded. First, teaching must yield academic success. I think we can all agree with that. If you're not learning, if you're not focused on academics, then what are you doing? Second, teaching must help students develop positive ethnic and cultural identities while simultaneously helping them achieve academically. I feel like that second part tends to be often lost, not maliciously or intentionally, but that just can sometimes happen uh, when you might have a predominantly white or Caucasian school and you have ethnic or minority children. Third, teaching must support students' ability to recognize, understand, and critique current and social inequalities. Again, that's the link between what you're learning academically and then what you can do for society. And it doesn't always have to be necessarily social inequalities. It could just be how you feel that you can contribute. So I guess it would be by these goals in their practice. Um, okay, let's move on. Practice culturally relevant practitioners can empower students not only intellectually but also socially, emotionally, and politically. And that's where the emotional, academics, emotional component of CRT comes in. So, if done correctly, students learn that they are not passive learners in their education, but active participants in the world. And I feel like that's very important because it gives students a sense of advocacy and agency. They realize that what they're learning in the classroom is not a separate compartment from the rest of the world. So, the three components of CRT, there's academic, cultural, and socio political. So, with the academic component, teachers have high expectations for their students. They expect them to achieve. Content teachers should definitely adopt this approach because a lot of the times when it comes to English second language learners, they don't expect or encourage their students to do much. Now, of course, there's always going to be accommodations and modifications in regards to working with ESL students, but we content teachers should definitely be working to encourage their students to develop the language. Um, so that's very important. It's okay to have high expectations of them. Okay. Another benefit of CRT is that it fosters a student's respect for their peers' culture by developing classrooms that are tolerant and inclusive. So, what a how a teacher could practice uh, the cultural component of CRT is to teach the classroom, teach your students about other students' culture, and use the students' culture as a lesson for the class. So often, a lot of bullying and making fun of happens when other students don't understand the other student's culture. So, for example, if you have a student who's from Honduras and they come into the classroom, you could use that as an opportunity to teach the class about Honduras. That's an excellent lesson to learn about that culture. And it may even help reduce bullying and prejudice. And in regard to the socio political aspect of CRT, it creates a sense of agency in students by letting them know that they're in integral role in society. Sure, they're students right now, but they're not always going to be. And that what they're learning can be used as a tool to help shape the larger society. Um, and it's consistent lessons on how students are part of society and can help make an impact, how they could possibly change things that they disagree with. So, what does CRT look like? Well, first, on the academic component, you want to meet students at their academic level. You want to have high expectations of them, but you still want to meet them at their level. For example, with regards to ESL students, you want to meet them at their level, and you would like for them to move from designated instruction to integrated instruction. Um, but you still meet them where they are. If you have students who are level one in all areas of literacy domains from WIDA, you would want to meet them at that level with the hopes that they can then move to a two and then a three and keep moving forward. And that's the same for any student. You also want to have students participate in projects based on their lived in uh, experiences. You want to make projects that are relevant to the student. Um, for example, in this e-learning age, where students are not familiar with iReady and they're not familiar with Google Hangouts and Google Meet, you want to teach them how. You want to use standards and Kala and things that can help them um, best be suited for their environment, things that matter to them. So, for example, when doing math problems, explain to the student why this is going to be important, or use it in such a way so that they understand that this will be needed, that this information is needed, and it's not just another, boring thing to do in class. Um, and you always want to take the opportunity to highlight a student's culture into a lesson. Compare and contrast cultures, culture, food, show, and tell. So, for example, if you have a student who comes in from Yemen, you could use that to explain everything about Yemen. That not only makes the students feel comfortable, but it also helps the entire class, and it's a fun learning experience. You could do show and tell of foods, and you could also have a compare and contrast. What are the differences between the United States and Yemen, or any culture that the student comes from? And lastly, you want to discuss current issues with students. You want to make it, of course, grade and level appropriate, but this is definitely a possibility. For example, if you have a student who is Hispanic, it's okay to discuss with them certain political decisions that are being made that may impact his or her population. Um, and what I recommend is perhaps using journals or writing prompts to get students um, to share their thoughts on these issues. It's okay to have these discussions. It's okay to have Socratic discussions with fifth graders about these kinds of issues. And then most importantly is explaining to the student how they can use what they've learned, what they've discussed to make that difference